Welcome to the YoggNation, the Spirit of Gratitude podcast on the One Integration platform. Hello, friends. My name is Yogesh Patel, and this podcast explores the themes of bullying, self-awareness, and the power of our inner spirit, including the silent battles we all face. Join me every week as I invite high-profile guests as we explore how adversity shapes us, how gratitude lifts us, and how we can all uncover the inner strength that we all have within ourselves. Join the conversation. I appreciate you listening in.
And today, my next guest brings more than 25 years of experience as a trusted strategic advisor to CEOs and board of directors. From publicly traded giants to emerging high-growth companies, Nancy May is a CEO of Boardroom Bench LLC, recognized by Forbes magazine as one of America's top governance experts. And she also hosts one of the top 25 business podcasts in the country, a true authority in the world of leadership and, of course, corporate governance. Today, Nancy shares what it's really like advising CEOs and boardrooms at the highest level, the similarities to everyday families, and this I am very curious to know, and related to self-awareness and her inner spirit. She opens up about a deeply personal topic that resonates with many of us, caring for our aging parents. And I raise my hand as my father is 86. With that said, with gratitude, welcome to the podcast, Nancy.
Hey, Yogi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm very curious to know, Nancy, what exactly is your role in advising CEOs and board of directors for these companies?
It's really the boards of directors that I've been working with right now, and also those candidates, those individuals who want to get there. But over the years, it's looking at the makeup and how the boards are constructed to really serve an institution, a corporation or an institution, to the highest level. And how do they work to make sure that the company is able to truly fulfill and execute on what its purpose is? And it's interesting when you think about that statement on its simplest form. Peter Drucker had also talked about this, and I know that you're a fan of Drucker as well. And I went out a number of years ago and asked CEOs and board of directors, what is the purpose of a corporation?
Ooh.
And I got all sorts of questions or all sorts of answers. They ran to holistic, they got very philosophical. They talked about structure and engineering and what these roles are supposed to be. And it was kind of like a tsunami. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the cloud got larger and larger and larger. And finally, one of my mentors, not Francis, but somebody else, a dear friend of mine, who had been the CEO of Sony America and done some really amazing things over the course of his career, said, well, and he went through the whole philosophical stuff, and he said, wait a second, this is a trick question. And I said, no, it's not. And he said, ultimately, the role of a company or a corporation is to make sure it sustains itself, that it continues to bring on customers that are profitable, and thus make sure that the company can remain whole and solvent. And I said, correct. The purpose of a corporation is to acquire and retain customers profitably. End of story.
Interesting.
You would be surprised. Big names, big people couldn't answer that. The board members, they're like all over this, dancing left and right. He said, oh, it's Nancy, excuse me. She must be thinking about some other things. Like, no, it's really, and that sort of gets back to, you were going to mention Frances, but just very simply, she was head of the Drucker Institute. And, anytime I had a difficult question or a problem, I'd say Frances Hesselbein, who was head of the Girl Scouts when I was a Girl Scout. And I'd say, Frances, like, this is the issue. What do I need? And she'd go, blip, it's this. I was like, oh, just break it down to its simplest form. And so I think, honestly, that is the most difficult job of boards today, is that we get so hung up in the details and the minutia that drag us left, right, up, or down a deep hole, or too far into the sunlight, into the clouds. And if we just stop and take a breath and say, what is the simplest, most pure thing that we're trying to achieve, and execute?
Well, I'm curious also, when you have these first meetings with these prospects or these potential clients, did you have to earn their trust and respect, or with your leadership experience, they had to earn yours?
I think it's actually a combination of both. And, I don't care whether I trust them or not. It's just a matter of, I'll find out the truth one way or another, whatever that truth is on something, right?
But they have to listen to you and really understand that you have their, or the corporation's, best interest at heart.
Best interest best interest at heart. And whether they listen to me is less of the issue. I think listening is a dialogue. It's not whether you hear the words that somebody is saying, is whether you actually absorb what the conversation is back and forth. Because listening is, it all comes down, listening is not a one-way street. It really is sort of an amalgamation of what you can put together, and then where is this going? It's hard to even, I would say, describe. But for somebody to listen to me, I'm not sure I'd say I don't care if they listen to me. I just honestly care that they're able to come to a conclusion that they need to do in order to succeed. And I'm not sure if that's listening or not.
Well, I think that's part of it, because it's projecting that energy, right? That again, in terms of advising these individuals in terms of what to do, what not to do, what things to think about, I think listening is more universal beyond just the corporate boardroom. It's everyday life in terms of how we deal with people, how we interact with people. The themes, again, of the podcast is around overcoming adversity. So listening to me is that extension of communication.
It's an act. So if you look at listening as an act of a sense, as opposed to an act of absorbing some information, it's a combination of both, right? So now we're going down the weeds. We don't need to go there.
Well, and in general terms, again, when you meet and speak with these CEOs and board of director level candidates, what do they care about? Or I guess, again, that's your definition.
That's a pretty broad. What do they care about? They ultimately care about the success of the institution that they're running. Because if that doesn't work, then they're SOL, right? They're out of a job. But I think ultimately also, a CEO and a board wants to make things are running smoothly so that their jobs aren't as difficult as they could be. It's how do you make things easier and better by keeping the ship running on calm waters.
Oh, or even in rough waters, even.
Yeah, well, rough, it's going to happen at some point, because there is no state of calm ever, at least in the world, especially in the corporate world. There's just too many outside influences. Maybe it's easier to get a state of calm in yourself, but when you're running an operation that includes thousands of employees and outside influences, and now you've got political, geopolitical, socioeconomic issues. You name it. There's so much hitting. It's kind of like an atom, like fusion.
And I guess what you just said reminds me of things such as accountability, perhaps what type of legacy that CEO or that director would wants to make, kind of their imprint, legacy. And also I think it's personal integrity, at least the corporations that get it right.
Yeah, I would say integrity. That word is an 800-pound gorilla, and sometimes CEOs, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but sometimes it's a word that just doesn't come up in the everyday thought process. It's either ingrained or it's not. If you think about, and it depends upon whether you call this, I think integrity has to be ingrained in you, who you are, right? It's something that you operate off of. Either you have a set of morals and you work on those principles, or you work in the gray areas, you push things out a little bit, or you don't. And there have been CEOs, there have been many leaders I've seen who have absolutely no moral principles, professional principles. I don't mean personal principles. I think that works hand in hand. But yeah.
I was just going to say that, did you ever experience that conflict? But I guess you have. I mean, you just said it.
I have seen it. Yeah, I have seen it. And quite frankly, when it becomes personal integrity at times, and they are a client, I've had some, in some cases, in order to do what's right, to help that individual lead the company, even though they may have some personal conflict that's going on, I have to think about, what is the role that we need to do to get that company and the rest of the employees, the corporation, the institution, moving properly, and just not let my personal bias get in the way.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point, because kind of what you just mentioned reflects that of what perhaps everyday families have to go through. So I'm really curious, right? If or what is the similarities between a board of director or CEO or the executive team versus that of the everyday family, which I believe that this podcast speaks to in terms of the listening audience. Just trying to relate what your professional experience is to that of what it is for everyday families.
There's a lot of similarities that we don't necessarily understand. There's there's a head of household. It's a mom and a dad. Or in my particular case, I was also taking care of aging parents. So I was the head of household, although my dad was the senior in our family structure. I was the one who was charged with making sure they stayed whole. So I guess you could say, I equated myself to being the CEO chairman of the family at the time. And right. And I did have shareholders. I mean, my shareholders were the beneficiaries of, ultimately, mom and dad were the customers or the clients. If you think about the corporate structure, and we've talked about this, but this is how I managed caring for my folks without getting emotionally frazzled and drained. If I was able to put this into some kind of structure, know what my roles and responsibilities were, to keep them safe, to keep them financially secure, to make sure that the people that I hired to take care of them, the aides and other workers that were there, were also treated with respect. And when they didn't treat my customers, meaning mom and dad, well, boop, goodbye, out of here. Make your decisions fast. How do you do it? In taking care of aging parents, I say you hire fast and you fire fast. In a corporate environment, you hire slow and you fire fast. But you have to hire fast because you don't have that time. You don't have that luxury of time in getting people in, because quite frankly, those types of care workers are in and out of doors so quickly and so fast that in order to get one and test it, yep, sounds good, feel good, trust my gut, get them in. We had one aide that didn't last 4 hours. 4 hours. We hired her, didn't last 4 hours. Out the door. There's the door. No, thank you very much. we have had others that didn't even make it into our employ, just by basically how they interacted with my folks right from the get-go. So that was those decisions are pretty easy to do. But back to the sort of the structure. So you are the corporate CEO or chairman. At least in elder care, your parents are the customers, the heart and soul of what you're taking care of, who benefits. You have employees, which are your care workers. You have vendors, which are your doctors and your suppliers and everything else. You have the results, so the positive outcomes that you want. So what are the the results that you want. You want happy, healthy, joyful parents. That's your customer feedback. That's your um, you might call it your employee engagement. And well, employee engagement is different, but that's your customer engagement. Your employee engagement is how well your workers are treating your customers, your parents, how they're reacting and coming back to you, that interaction. We had monthly Zoom calls, and I was in and out between Connecticut and Florida, so I was doing this from 1,200 miles away. Beneficiaries was everybody that benefited from the ultimate demise of my parents when they had finances, and my sister, myself, beneficiaries that were outside institutions that my parents decided to give money to. So I had to make sure that that worked. I had to fire and right size financial advisors, doctors who just were like not on the moral strength. You name it. You move fast and then manage a budget. You're managing a balance sheet. What's coming in, what's going out, how does it work? Working with outside financial advisors to make sure things are being taken care of properly. Investments are run well. So I'm working with pensions, right? When you think about it that way.
And I'd imagine another key shareholder is having kids, and that itself is another board level type of team as well, where you've got their schooling, right? They need to be fed.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have children, your children are well, you're the parent, so you're the CEO or chairman at the time. You're co-CEOs. Your children are they can be, well, it depends. Sometimes they're your employees if they're taking out the trash, right? And earning earning some sort of not with solid salary. What I'm drawing a blank on allowance. Thank you. I don't have kids. I have dogs and a husband. but the school, their college, their education, their private education, whatever that might be, those are outside resources that you rely on, and if they don't work, you have to make sure it's time to make a change. It's a constant assessment and balance of the corporation of the family, right?
Yeah, just kind of going back to the care for elderly parents. Again, a lot of, I think, parents do struggle between how do they age for their caring mom and dad versus taking care of the kids and running that household. And I was just curious to find out if perhaps you have some sort of guidance or blueprint in terms of how they can manage all of their emotional, mental, physical, and perhaps financial stresses that that come that perhaps may come their way.
Yeah, I'd say as much as you can keep the assets and the relationship of your, we were talking financially right now, of your parents and your own separate. They're two separate institutions that you're working on. Don't let that line blur. There always is. Statistically, I think they say that the average caregiver is paying anywhere between, out of their own pocket, $7,000 to $10,000 a year, which I think is low in the scope of things. Whether it's gifts or other things, they're just things that come up that sometimes you can't divide. But keeping that as much separate as you possibly can helps with the financial stress. If your parents can't take care of themselves financially, getting the outside support. This is where you need to pull on resources on your vendors, right? Your outside suppliers who can say, well, then let's look at their financial assets. If they're not balanced properly, make sure you have a financial advisor that is, as the old term goes, it's benefit to client, not benefit to broker. We fired a financial advisor who I actually looked at going to FINRA, but I just didn't have the time. It took us 3 years to unravel the mess that this guy had done to my parents. They would have been financially destitute if I didn't get in and fire him once I had, I'll say, control of the reins, in order to make sure my folks were financially sound. And it was costing them $360,000 a year to live in a care facility eventually. and they didn't have those assets. So we ended up moving them out and making decisions together with a new financial advisor, somebody I'd known well and trusted, an accountant and an attorney, which I brought on. We fired all the others who were looking at mom and dad. The Mom and Dad Inc. is the great well. I call it the great sucking sound. They were doing it right there. But really seriously taking a look at those people that are that your parents rely on and questioning every aspect of their decisions. Because unfortunately, in this state where we are today, where the population is aging, and we as now aging adults ourselves want to make sure that we can take care of ourselves as long as we possibly can, there is a significant percentage of individuals and companies that are looking at us as cash cows without understanding how important it is to make sure that that well doesn't dry for the family before that individual passes. And many of these companies, and I'm being very, very cynical about this for a reason, because I honestly have seen so much of this happen. And including well-intentioned people who have gone bankrupt in trying to take care of their parents, because the system, I don't say it's really a system, but so many outside institutions are saying, look, you can't take it with you, so we'll just take it for you. From hospitals to doctors to insurance companies to banks to financial institutions to advisors to medical care experts, you name it, it is out there. I say, just be very aware of it. It's not, I haven't painted a pretty picture, but it's a realistic picture.
No, you haven't. But at the same time, I think is perhaps overshadowed though by just the love that you have and respect you have for your parents, right? Because I think that's where I'm sensing, Nancy, that is where your inner spirit comes from in terms of just, at the core within your heart and within your soul, it's the ability to help your parents when perhaps I'm sure you've had those memories of them, of raising you and what those experiences were like.
Just every family, there's up and down as kids. I was a good kid at one point, and sometimes I wasn't so good, right? Oh, Nancy, you're not good. Like, oh, no, it's just like angel. Ching. But, the lessons that I learned growing up, even through those difficult times, for my folks and for myself, taught me, I guess I really had to have a fighting spirit in a good way, whether it be for my folks or a client I believe in. I'm going to, or the client I'm working with and I believe in. I will fight like a dog. You may not know it, but behind the scenes, above and beyond the call to do what's right for the purpose of the end goal that needs to be achieved.
Would you happen to say that is your spirit of gratitude?
From what I learned from my folks?
Yes.
Yeah, I learned a lot from both of them, and probably it wasn't. I watched my dad. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was a business owner, and he took over his dad's business at the end of World War II when his father was dying. And I heard a lot of those stories of what happened. I saw a lot of the challenges that he went through, and quite frankly, also the employees on the factory floor were Uncle Saul and Aunt Sally. They were family members. That's how I knew them as kids, and I enjoyed walking and getting to know them. But yeah, ultimately, I also learned how much strength my mom had and went through as a young woman, and a mom when she was I was the oldest. I was the firstborn, and it wasn't until she was probably close to her final years that I realized, God, what strength. Like she was she was an iron fortress, and we just never knew it as kids.
Well, I think that's also an important lesson to the listeners. Hearing that is, looking at perhaps your family, whether it's your mom or your dad or even your sibling, to see and understand what is their inner strength that gives them the ability to move on. I mean, certainly we all have our challenges, external or internal, but getting that strength within your family to help guide you again with that sense of self-awareness, that inner spirit, that sense of gratitude.
Listen to the stories, because family stories, I don't think we listen to enough. But ask questions. What was it like? What did you do? Have you ever had a difficult time? Can you tell me about that? And when they stop, tell me more. Yeah, just the biggest question to ask is, can you tell me more?
Well, that actually transitions to a fun topic, and that is you, beyond having the business podcast, you also have a food podcast.
I do. Family Tree Food and Stories. We're having a blast.
Tell me about that, Nancy.
Well, I started my career in advertising, and I think it's all my creative juices. Maybe it's Oju coming back into play again, right? And so I've got a podcast with the co-host Sylvia Lovely, and that is called Family Tree Food and Stories. We have a book, which is behind me, which is a journal that people learn to write their family stories as it relates to the recipes and the stories that they've had around the dinner table, because that's where life happens so often within our families, and not just with our families, but within the employees and the corporations that you get to know. I shared with somebody the other day, said, I can't tell you how many deals have gone down or gone up positively with conversations over a meal with a new prospective client, because I got to know who they were as a person. I got to know about their family. I got to know as you might say, their inner soul, and we connected. So yeah, that's so important today, and we miss it. So don't forget I say every meal has a story, and every story is a feast.
And I guess it's also perspective in the way that a person happens to see themselves at a dinner table.
Absolutely. And there's a story around everything that we eat and do. We have to eat in order to survive and stay healthy and whole as individuals and leaders. And so why not learn a little bit about it? We're recording tomorrow a show on beer and pubs. So, but at least here in the States, and in many cases, most of the foods that we have, if not all of the foods we have, started somewhere with a family and a person.
And that is the essence of what this podcast aims to serve. Again, it's you bring up three interesting themes. You've got corporate governance, you've got the family, and you've got the podcast, the food podcast, and tying them all together, it is around just what helps you nourish your soul. I mean, certainly for an individual that works for a corporation, it's nourishing your financials, right? To make sure that you save, you invest, you take care of your family, whether it's the kids or the aging parents. As CEO, and that transitions into just that inner spirit and gratitude of what, perhaps generationally, what your kids teach you, what your parents have taught you, for you to become who you are, kind of that inner energy that you also exude, and then how food ties everything together in terms of just that family dynamics.
Sometimes it's as simple as things that take our breath away. We don't realize it till after the fact, and we don't stop enough to appreciate it. And if you do, I think you might say, hey, that meeting really went well. Or I didn't realize how strong mom or dad was, or my sister, or my brother, or my uncle, my aunt, what they went through. And you hear about them quite often sitting at a meal, having a beer together, or, just a bowl of ice cream. It's the sweetest.
Whatever your comfort food is, right?
The sweetest things bring out the best memories, shall we say, right?
Absolutely. That is so true. Well, Nancy, it was such an honor to have you again. I guess for the listening audience, for me, it was kind of a challenge to try and connect the dots with who Nancy is in terms of her professional background. I mean, being in the same room as these powerful, transformative leaders that help shape society and provide a comfortable living for its employees, and to have her on the podcast, I was really honored that you said yes. And again, for me, the challenge was, how do you take Nancy May, the professional person that she is with her accomplishments? Out of curiosity, one final question I want to ask: did you experience any bullying in the boardroom? Again, a lot of this podcast is around overcoming adversity, especially messaging around bullying. And so, anything that, a perspective that you can share, and how perhaps that situation.
I have. I've seen it. I've seen it and I've heard it. And sometimes it's very subtle, just based on how people are sitting around the table and what's going on and the politics that are going on. Um, it'd probably take another show to talk a little bit about that. I've seen others where um, corporation have merged. So one acquiring company comes to the other, and now you've got people in the boardroom who are jockeying for positions. And so I'll use the term, the subtle aggression that happens between the competition of directors, who's going to be there, who's not going to be that, who's in charge, and some people who just, I roll over and play dead and let it happen. Never should. And others who have unknowingly brought in the rogue, who sabotaged their situation. Well, those that roll over and play dead, I call it the happy puppy syndrome. Sometimes, you roll over the happy puppy's the belly, and then the puppy pees and goes away. Guess what? The one in particular I'm thinking about, who brought in what ended up being the rogue director, lost their position. And another who, these are three situations, because I sort of like to work with three. It's easy to collect on three. It was a position of seating, and a very large, significantly good sized company, private company. Well, it was a public company, and the relationship between the chairman and a younger related member, who was also in the boardroom, potentially to be groomed, was just about sitting on the lap of the other individual who wanted to be in a position of leadership on the board. And I could see, that person is grappling for the chairman's role by sucking up to the family. It was a large public company, but you've got sometimes off the family dynamics that still take into play. And sure enough, they ended up being in that position very shortly thereafter. And I said, not necessarily the best person, but all you had to do, it took me less than 5 minutes to realize what was going as I walked in the door, and I thought, I know what's happening here.
But would another director see it as well? Or they would be powerless to act upon that?
Not necessarily. No. Joe's just mentoring them. No, not necessarily. Mentoring for and jockeying for position. So people are not necessarily always aware of how body language and physical position and what the intentions of one person might be over another, and how that trust is a strange thing in a boardroom.
Because I would have to think that truth would always win. Certainly not the case, but this element of trust, and we'll leave this as.
Yeah, you got people, you're sitting on the board, right? You trust, you figure that other person is there with you, you're a peer, you're going to trust them. I wouldn't necessarily do that. Trust but verify, as they say, right? Yeah. Excuse me?
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And always bring a bowl of your jelly beans. But you have to really learn to read and see things with your eyes, your ears, your gut, and sometimes that nervous vibration, just sort of you can sort of feel it and see it, and how people, how they all treat the new person in the room or a vendor coming into the room. It's subtleties and egos and power plays sometimes are not always noticed.
Well, yeah, we could definitely explore that on a different podcast episode, Nancy. But again, thank you for sharing all the wonderful information, and hope again the citizens of YoggNation, the listeners, as I like to call them, find a nugget of wisdom that they can apply. I think certainly a lot of what Nancy's thought leadership, or in general, not necessarily around corporate governance, but that of taking care of the elders. And she also has a, I believe, website called Caremanity as well that helps. And so
It's that there's a podcast which is Elder Care Success. They can go there. Yeah. And a few things to chew on, both intellectually and
yeah, and for me, just on a personal note, looking at my dad who's 86, and just again beyond just duty, it's that love and respect in terms of what myself and my wife can do to take care of him. Again, out of the love and appreciation for what he's given us, and so hopefully that resonates to a lot of the folks out there that's listening to this podcast, or perhaps real. And Nancy, again, I thank you so kindly for coming on the podcast. And yes, thanks again.
it's a pleasure, Yogi.
Bye for now.